Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you had a great weekend. It's time for a new episode of Record Collecting with a Quill. The theme for today is leftover albums. For obvious reasons, we're releasing a leftover album with a Quill this month, so thought it would be a fitting subject. I'm quite fond of leftover albums. There's quite a tons of stuff with various bands. What is a leftover album? Well, it's an album. Some are compilations with leftover tracks from a long period of time, from a certain band or artist, or it could be outtakes from sessions and something that wasn't intended to be an album in the first place. That's my sort of trying to narrow it down. And as I said, I'm quite fond of these. There's some real nuggets to be found on a lot of these albums, because whenever an artist record an album, you tend to record more than you need, and sometimes you have to leave certain songs. Maybe you have two songs that are quite similar in a way, and you decide to go with one for the album and the other one ends up in the bin. So there's a lot of cool stuff. So I decided to pick 7 of my favorite leftover albums. Hope you join me. But before we start, you know the drill. Make sure you subscribe and hit that little notice bell as well, and share with your friends. Well, starting out, the first of the mother of all leftover albums, and I think probably one of the first ones, is this one. The Who, Odds and Sods, released in 1974 and was compiled by John Entwistle, the bass player. Hope I pronounced it right. It's quite hard for a Swede as me. Originally, this one was 11 tracks spanning the Who's career up until then, or leftover tracks, and then they re-released it in 1998, I believe, and added tons of tracks. So this version, the CD version I have, you can see has actually, I believe it's 23 tracks. And what can be said about this? Well, it's The Who in their prime. You really don't have to say anything more about it. There's some cool studio versions of Summertime Blues. You have a studio version of Young Man Blues. Yeah, lots of great stuff. And as I said, it's The Who in their prime, so it's ought to be good. Check it out. I think it's available in a couple of different mixes as well. They remixed a lot of tracks for this 98 release, but then I think they re-released it again. I think it was released as a Record Store Day release on vinyl, where I think they went back to the original mixes as well. So a couple of different versions out of it. Check it out, do your homework, and find the best version, but I'm quite pleased with this one. The Who, Odds and Sods. Next one is maybe not an album you think of as an leftover album, but indeed it is. It's this one, Rolling Stones' Tattoo You. The word is there was a lot of infighting in the band, and they couldn't agree on doing a follow-up to Emotional Rescue. So the people around Rolling Stones started digging in the archives and went through whatever they had recorded from the 70s. And then found tons of great stuff, and some stuff were overdubbed and embellished in the studio, but the heart of the album is old outtakes from the 70s, but it's one of my favorite Stones albums. Tells a little bit about how good they were in the 70s, and even though it's credited to the lineup in 1981, I believe. You have Mick Taylor here on a couple of tracks as well, since it's old outtakes. But you have, Start Me Up, you have Hang Fire, you have, lots of great tracks on this one. So my second pick, Tattoo You by Rolling Stones. Next one. I don't think I mentioned him before, but I'm a big fan of Stevie Ray Vaughan and Double Trouble, and this is the album they released after his death. He died in a helicopter accident. And the album is called The Sky's Crying. It was compiled by his brother Jimmy Vaughan from Fabulous Thunderbirds. And this contains various leftover tracks from his recording career, I think from around 82 and up until 89 or something. And it really showcases Stevie's whole talent. There's some furious guitar playing on a couple of tracks here. I think Wham is one of my favorites, but there are also a lot of more mellow tracks. The last track, Life by The Drop, is a favorite of mine, and also almost jazzy stuff in, what's it called, Schittlings con Carne. Yeah, and a great version of Little Wing as well, the Jimi Hendrix track. So it's a fitting end. They released a lot of other stuff, live recordings, I believe, mostly from his career, but this one came just, I believe, a year after his death, and it's a fitting end to his recording career, and a great album. Next one is also an end of quite a famous career. Led Zeppelin Code album. I guess if you're listening to this channel, you know the story. John Bonham died in 1980, and Led Zeppelin had one more album to do according to their record contracts, one more studio album. So Jimi Hendrix, for God's sake, Jimmy Page, sorry about that. Jimmy Page went through the archives, and there wasn't tons of stuff because Physical Graffiti is a lot of outtakes on that one as well, stuff recorded in the early days of Led Zeppelin. But he found some stuff, some early stuff, and a couple of outtakes from the In Through the Outdoor sessions in Stockholm. And this one is, I believe it's the weakest, of course. It's the weakest of the Led Zeppelin recordings, but there's still some cool stuff. And I've later learned that I thought a couple of tracks are made to be looked at as they were studio recordings by Jimmy Page, so it could be sold as a studio album to Atlantic. Mainly two tracks, I believe. We're Gonna Groove is actually, it's taken from the Royal Albert Hall session, the live show that is on the DVD, but they've re-recorded guitar for it, and they obviously they canned the audience noise as well, but it's actually the drums and the bass is from the live recording, I believe, the vocals as well. And also I Can Quit You Babe is also from Royal Albert Hall, but in a edited version. But there's some cool stuff. Poor Tom is a cool track, a great drum groove by John Bonham, of course, and Wearing and Tearing, I think, is a good song. The last one is Led Zeppelin's answer to punk. It's a cool track as well. But as I said, maybe the weakest one in the Led Zeppelin catalog, but that doesn't tell you much because the Led Zeppelin catalog is so fantastic, so there's still tons of cool stuff here. Next one is a band that been so productive. It's Pearl Jam and their compilation called Lost Dogs. This is unreleased tracks, it's B-sides. As you can see, they're a productive band. This was released in 2003. It's tons of tracks. I believe it's well over, I think it's 25 tracks. And what's kind of interesting with this one is when Pearl Jam, their albums, in my opinion, and it's important in my opinion, their albums got a little bit more difficult for each album to get into. I'm a big fan of Pearl Jam, but I think they were more accessible in the beginning, and I think they, for obvious reasons, strayed away from that. But here, when you look at outtakes and when you look at B-sides, you can see that they still had it, but they decided not to release those songs, or they didn't release them, sneak them on as a B-side or something, because there's tons of great stuff here that would have fit perfect on 10 or Versus or those early albums. So a couple of songs I'm really fond of. One called Undone, Alone is a great track as well. Yeah, tons of cool stuff. So if you're into Pearl Jam and haven't got this one, and like the early Pearl Jam stuff, I'm pretty sure you will find some real nuggets on this one. Pearl Jam, Lost Dogs. Next one. This is a 3-disc vinyl set. Black Crowes, Lost Crows, it was called originally when it was released on CD. Here it's called Tall, and this on the other disc you have is the band, and it's actually from 2 different sessions. First, the Tall sessions, that was the start of the Amorica album. So you have a lot of early versions of the Amorica album, but they decided to re-record everything. Great versions, obviously. And then also you have sessions from 1997, I usually refer to as the band. I believe the last stuff they did with Mark Ford and Johnny Colt as well. And there you have tons of great stuff as well. That a lot of stuff was later re-recorded for By Your Side and made a lot more commercial and got the commercial sound of that album. But you have some of my favorite Black Crowes tracks on this album. You have a track called Wyoming and Me. I think it's fabulous. Feathers is also another favorite of mine from the band sessions. So if you're into Black Crowes, you must have this one. It's, for some reason, it's not available streaming, but it's available. They released the vinyl version a couple of years ago, and it's available on CD as well. And I believe it's called Lost Crows on CD. Mandatory to have. Great album. And the next one, a guy who I believe is more famous for the things he had said no to as opposed to what he said yes to. It's a guy called Terry Reid. If you're a real fan of music, I was meant to say, you probably know this guy. He's maybe most famous for being the guy that turned down both Led Zeppelin and Deep Purple when they approached him for the place as singer in both bands. But he released a handful of albums in the late 60s and the early 70s, and his, I believe, most famous one is called The River, or River only. And this is an outtake released a couple of years ago called Terry Reid on the Other Side of River, with outtakes from that album. That, in my opinion, is... For some reason I got the CD version, don't ask me why. I have to find the vinyl version. But Terry Reid is... fantastic voice. His voice is, you can see why Jimmy Page was interested in him from the beginning. Really identifiable and great songwriting. And if you're a fan of the River album, you will totally love this one. There's a couple of outtakes or different takes that I think matches the original versions. Actually, some stuff here is a little bit. There's a couple of demos with him just noodling around on a piano. So, but the stuff there is here, I can't really see why it didn't make the original album, because it's a lot better. And I think the original album would have benefited from it, even though the original album is fantastic. So, tells you a little bit about how great it is. But you should definitely check this one out if you're into Terry Reid, and if you haven't heard him, you must check him out, because you will totally love him and his voice. Great singer. Well, there's tons of other leftover albums, so I would love to hear your opinion. What are your favorite ones? I actually had a list of like 15 albums when I started out with this episode, and I narrowed it down to 7 as usual. I would love to hear your opinion. Leave a comment in the comment section, and also I will put some of these albums aren't available on Spotify, but as usual I will put those who are. I will put some samples in the Spotify playlist. You find a link down below. And also be sure to check out our version of a leftover album called Live New Borrowed Blue. It's out late January on Metalville Records. And also make sure you follow us on social media. It's the QUILL Sweden, as usual. The QUILL Sweden. See you all again next week, and bye for now. Cheers.